Hello, everyone. So we are about a minute past the time of starting, so we're going to get started. And there are 3 other parallel talks happening to this. So I appreciate you choosing this one over those. There is one happening about hacking Kubernetes. I want to be on that one too. So apparently I'm going to have to give this talk. But again, I love that you are here. We're going to talk about a little bit about scale. Again, like any good talk, I'm going to break down my titles because it's super vague. What does cost of scale mean? So the first word we have is cost. So what does that mean? When you think of cost, we easily understand the following, right? Cost of money, people, or time. That's super easy. But I think cost is a lot more. What I understand cost as is you are giving this away for getting something. In this scale, you are spending this to get scale. Next word in the title that actually needs some meaning is scale. And English is a super confusing language because every word has like 17 different meanings. And if you look up in dictionary, the word scale can mean anything from to measure, like I want to weigh my thing, I put it on a scale. It can mean something like a ratio on a scale of 1 to 10. It can mean things like growth, like I'm scaling this from small to big. It can also mean to climb, apparently. You can like scale a mountain, scale up the wall. I didn't know this one. But in our talk today, we're talking about scale in terms of growth, right? We're talking about tech. We're talking about companies growing from small to big. We're talking about services growing from small to big. So this is the talk. In this talk, we're going to talk about growth, only the blue one, if you can see that one. All right. I'm Mofi. I'm a developer advocate at Google. I focus on Kubernetes. So I have to deal with scale quite a lot. This is my 3rd consecutive year at CDC. So I'm only one of the 3 people in this conference, me, Cecile, and Phil, who made it for 3 years back to back. So pretty excited about that one. This is the last talk of the day. So I would actually ask all of you to give a big hand to yourself and the organizers for making this conference happen. It's amazing. And the community and the people here are so great. I keep coming by every year. I mean, it happening at a resort helps, but I usually come for the people. In the past, I've also worked at IBM, so I do have some ideas of some large-scale companies and some large-scale projects. So I kind of think I am a little bit qualified to talk about scale to some extent. So who is here for a tech talk? Anyone? Oh, 2 person. False. We're not talking tech. You have all been lied to, and you have all been tricked by the title to come into this room, because today we're talking about trains. 1 person, yes. It helps that she's my wife, but does help. More specifically, we're talking about public transportation. Even more specifically, we're talking about NYC subway. Anyone have been to New York City before? Few of you. Any of you been to the subway before, the train? Few of you, great. So it's going to be amazing. After this talk, you'll all be well-versed in the in and outs of how the NYC subway works, and you'll take more information in than you'll ever need in your entire life about subway. And you'll be super fun at parties because you'll know so many facts about subways that you can tell to other people, and they're going to think you're awesome for knowing those things. We're going to start with the big one. If you took all the tracks that NYC subway has and laid it out from New York, you would actually reach all the way to Chicago. Pretty cool, 1/3 of US. All right, this is the subway map on the right of New York City. You see all these tracks, all these different lines. And it's a fairly complex system. This subway on the top connects all 4 boroughs, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and Bronx. And there is like a bunch of different lines. They interconnect. There is transfer between them. So it's a fairly complex system. So this is why I'm trying to kind of correlate a subway system to an idea of a real-world or technical system that also needs the problem of scale. I mean, if you think about it, a rail system is a good analogy of how a tech system actually works. Let me explain a little bit more. So if you look at what the subway, like in a glance, what the subway has, we have about 472 different stations. Among them, 424 unique stations. They don't touch anything else. We have about 28 different services, 36 different lines. It runs for 24/7, all day, every day. The total route length is about 248 miles, with total track length over 600 miles. We have about 1.6 billion annual ridership, huge amount of people, and annual revenue of about 2.1 billion. That's in negative. It loses money, so like a startup. And we also have 70,000 people working for the MTA. This does cover like bridges, tunnels, buses, etc. If you took the same numbers and laid it out like a fictional tech company, if I said I have like 472 cloud functions, I had 424 client accounts, I had 28 services over 36 regions, and it runs 24/7 ETL pipelines, or like does 1.6 billion transactions, those numbers start sounding like a tech company to you, doesn't it? Before we kind of get into how the subway is today, let's talk about what it was and how it got to become the big thing it is now. So this picture is a hand-drawn picture of New York City at 1870. As you can see, like this is downtown Manhattan in front of us. There are a few like 3-4-story buildings. And most of the population of Manhattan lived below the 60th Street line before Central Park, all the way over there in the green in the middle. Most of Queens at this point is deserted. No one lives there. Brooklyn is mostly just this downtown Brooklyn. New Jersey has some few houses on the left on the corner you can see. This is a picture from 2017. New York has grown quite a bit. You can see all the tall buildings in the top here. Queens is almost all full. New York grown all the way up to Bronx at this point. You have New Jersey, you have Brooklyn on the side, but you can see that right now. But over the 150 years, New York has grown in population about 10 times. In terms of infrastructure, it's grown hundreds or more times. And I think the subway has been an integral part of how New York actually grew as a city. So beginning of this story starts at 1868, about 154 years ago. So on the right, the picture we see is a picture of the 9th Avenue elevated line. This is the first ever attempt of a local train system with many stops. New York had trains, like freight trains, bringing goods from other parts of the country. Those are big trains stopping at just like the ports. But this is the first attempt of like trains for people, from moving people from one side of the town to the other side of the town. The first pass had this 1 mile long cable that powered the trains. And this 1 mile loop ran for 1 mile, then a new loop had to be connected. And the train had this anchoring like system that swapped from the first one to the second one every time it passed 1 mile. It had many safety concerns. First of all, it's built like 50 feet on the air. And the picture you see here, this was called Suicide Curve at 110th Street, because the curve was so severe, it almost always felt like the train is going to fall over. And in 1905, it actually did. So the first pass had a lot of problem. It had legal troubles because it was noisy, it was dangerous for people's lives, and it shut down initially at 1970, only after 2 years. So a different company bought the entire system for $960, which is roughly $15,000 for today's money. Imagine buying an entire train system for $15,000. I would do it today, but apparently I can't. So this is the first pass. Imagine a startup coming with a new novel idea with an MVP, and you try this out, and amazing, it works, but it's not profitable, there is a lot of problem with it, and it gets sold, acquired by a different company. Along the same time, there's a whole different idea, like 1869, some guy called Eli Beach comes with an idea of a pneumatic transit that is pushed by air underground. At this point, never heard of before, no one knows how underground trains are supposed to work, and people were really impressed by it. It's a super technically cool demo, and the train system was built only for 90 meters. It was a train system that's 90 meters long, which is less than from here to the end of the main stage, right? That's the entire train system. The guy spends about $350,000 of his own money, which is about $7.6 million. Talk about seed funding. So he does that for his own company, builds a 90-meter line underground in Manhattan, and the then mayor doesn't actually agree with his idea. So he lies to the government and says, this is for delivering mail. I mean, probably not legal, but he did it anyway. And he built this system in 58 days. So talk about MVP and getting the product out in the market fast. So the idea of this train was to show that the trains, underground trains, could be cool, could be for rich and hip people, and it worked. In the first year, they did 400,000 total rides, and each ride costing in today's value about $5. The waiting rooms had pianos, had like refreshments for people. But again, it's for 90 meters. It's literally what you can walk in less than 2 minutes. But people would still take the train because it's a cool new thing that no one has seen before. But again, the coolness factor ran away over after 3 years. People no longer cared about it because it's the same ride. Underground, you can see nothing else other than just the train itself. So about 3 years later, the steam for pushing the train no longer was there. The guy didn't want to spend any more of his own money, so eventually it shut down. Another fun fact, later in the story, when New York City actually starts building underground tunnels, they actually found one of the tunnels that was shut down for this train, and they found the piano that was being used for the underground, like refreshment for the attendees there. So they found the underground tunnel that was being used for this. Okay, so now, 1878, the first pass of the elevated train, 9th Avenue, was working pretty great. So we have now the 6th Avenue elevated. 6th Avenue goes through basically the middle of Manhattan. So another company called Gilbert Elevated Railway started a different company that made a 6th Avenue elevated line. And another fun fact story about this line, in 1942, when this line ran out of its service, they were shutting it down. They were breaking these giant steel beams from above. And there was a rumor going on that US was going to sell this steel to Japan. So Japan was at the time part of the Axis, or during World War II, they were fighting the Allies. And there was a rumor going on for some reason that was saying that the steel from this railway was going to go to Japan for some reason. And the contractors at the time had to go and give a written affidavit saying they're not going to do that. Like, yes, we promise we're not going to sell the steel to Japan. But again, there was no actual proof behind this, so nothing happened there. We also have the 3rd Avenue elevated line. It started in 1875, and it ran until 1973. At 1879, we also have now Gilbert Elevated Railway now realized 6th Avenue was super profitable for them at the time. They want to expand their business. They made a second line on the 2nd Avenue. So 1885, until this point, all the railway lines in New York are happening in Manhattan because that's where the most of the population is. But as time is growing, New York, Manhattan is no longer the place to live. People are slowly moving away into Brooklyn and other places. And there's an opportunity, so a company starts the Brooklyn Elevated Line in 1885. It starts the first elevated line in Brooklyn, and service was until 1950 for this one. 1888 was a big year for Brooklyn. We saw a number of different innovations happening in that space. We're seeing the Fulton Street Elevated Line, which is still in service in part of A, C, L, and J train. We have the Broadway Brooklyn Line, which is still part of J and M line. I took the J train to school for like 4 years when I was going to school in New York. Terrible train. Myrtle Avenue line, still part of M train. We have the Hudson Avenue line, which is still stopped operation in 1940. So all of these lines are happening, and they're run by individual companies. They're making some lines trying to sell people ticket for a short amount of space. It wasn't working out great for all the companies at the same time. So a lot of these companies that were created at this time had no real path to profitability. Another startup lingo I picked up from yesterday's talk. Creating new lines is expensive because it takes a lot of investment early on to build up a new system. And by themselves, a single line had no business plan to become profitable by itself. So, and as these lines were progressing more towards uptown Manhattan, the density of population was falling off because not too many people lived in that part at the time. And if you look at the map of population growth in Manhattan versus the train lines, you will see that the population growth kind of went hand in hand with the train lines. Where the train line went, people could choose to live there so that they could commute back to their workplaces. So there was like a product market fit problem, right? You need to have people there so that they take the trains, but you need to have train lines there so that people can live there. So there was like a chicken and egg problem with the trains. So after all of this trouble with the money, the 4 lines in Manhattan, the 9th, 6th, 3rd, and 2nd Avenue line basically went bankrupt. They didn't have any more money to run the system. And they got consolidated under this company called Manhattan Railway Company. The idea was the single company is going to own all 4 lines. They're going to have more market share. They're going to eventually become profitable. Another startup idea that people usually have, right? Like, I'm going to get more of the market, make more money. Again, part of the story, we'll get to it in a second, but eventually MRC leased all their lines to another company called IRT for 1,000 years. I don't know how a 1,000-year lease works. No one's going to live for that long, but they did it anyway. 1896, same problem with Brooklyn. So Brooklyn, we are creating new lines, but all of those lines are owned by individual companies and no path to real profitability. But so 1898, following the footsteps of MRC, all the lines in Brooklyn joined up and became Brooklyn Rapid Transits. All the Brooklyn lines became under a single company. Now at this point, you have two companies, MRC and BRT. But again, the new company is still making new lines. Brooklyn Elevated Line is the first line to cross from Brooklyn to Manhattan. So until then, the two boroughs were separated. This is going over Brooklyn Bridge to connect the two boroughs by a train line together. 1904. So this is a huge move from New York, because at this point, for the first time, we created a train line that went underground properly. The first test with beach pneumatic transit was 30 years ago. It failed pretty spectacularly, but at this point, we're seriously building underground tunnels. And this tunnel was what we know now as a modern subway. If you went underground train, this is a tunnel that started building in 1904. So the first one, Interborough Rapid Transit, IRT. So this is the company that leased all the lines from MRC for 1,000 years. So all the above ground line in Manhattan is now owned by this company, but they're also starting to build underground tunnels. So IRT creates the first underground subway. Underground subway is superior because elevated lines were noisy. It was distracting to people. They had dangers of, if it snowed or rained, the track got slippery. But underground was kind of protected from all these troubles. And talk about a successful launch. When the Date launched the Broadway 7th Avenue line, in the first day, they had 150,000 people riding the train. If I had a startup and had 150,000 users day one, I'd be so ecstatic. And they charge about 5 cents, which is about $1.67 in today's value for fare each way. So at the same time, Brooklyn is not stopping. They're also building their train tracks. Lenox Avenue line expanded from Broadway, 7th Avenue line, and it's part of the 2-3 train. This is also still part of IRT, by the way. They're just expanding uptown. And White Plains Road, again, IRT, just a new company, have a lot of steam, a lot of money. They're building new tracks all the time. In the same year, they're building more tracks going more uptown. 1906, we have BRT Canarsie line. This is the L train that we have now. Went all the way from downtown Manhattan, all the way through Brooklyn, all the way to Brooklyn downtown. We have 1915. This is the time in the world where World War I is happening. The world is in like tumultuous state, but US is kind of isolated from it because US didn't really go to World War I right away, and they sent people. War didn't happen here. So development in the US is going strong. So we have the IRT Queensboro, Manhattan, all the way through the 7th Avenue line, 7 line that is now exist. You have the BRT 4th Avenue line, all the way through Brooklyn downtown towards like the beach downtown in Brooklyn. 1916, we have BRT West End, another line in Brooklyn, now part of D train. 1917, you have the IRT Astoria line. This is the train that goes all the way through Astoria, all the way downtown in Astoria that way. You have the Jerome Avenue line, part of IRT. 1918, you have the IRT Pelham line. Again, all of these are expansion new lines that are being created super quickly. As you can see, over the 15 years, they built miles and miles of new track. This is the Lexington Avenue line. This is the underground line that goes through 4th Avenue in Manhattan. This is part of the 4, 5, and 6 line right now. In 1919, we have the BRT Culver line, which is part of the F train. You can see some of the pictures of while it was being constructed. In 1920, now you have Eastern Parkway line, more lines, just new lines being created left and right. So IRT is growing super crazy right now, but at the same time, they're burning money by creating new lines like every day. But as they're growing, these new lines are bringing less and less money because one new line doesn't add to their bottom line all that much. So 1924, by this time, the Brooklyn BRT went bankrupt because they've been running for about 20 years and they ran out of all they were not in the path of profitability. So a company called BMT now acquires all the lines in BRT and becomes a new company. And at the time, these are all the lines they own just by being part of BRT, from BRT. And this new company, once again, a new company comes in, they have a lot of seed funding, so they start building new lines all over again. So they build the Canarsie line, they expand the Canarsie line to more. And 1932, this is the first time our main character is coming in after about 60 years of being around. And we're going to talk about the real champion of this multiple startups struggling to get the New York train system going. And it comes from an unlikely source, at least in the startup world. In real world, it happens quite a lot. And our character is IND, Independent Subway System. And Independent Subway System is a city-owned subway. So in 1920, the then mayor of New York thought, you know what, it would be great if we had our own subway system owned by the New York City, instead of paying this like third-party companies that are like taking up our land and doing all these things. And so what they wanted to do, build this subway system that was city-owned, is going to be great for the city as well as for the people living in the city. IND initially planned on competing against the other two companies so that people get the best price possible. But again, as you're going to see in a second, it's never really fair when you're talking about in the startup scene. So IND opens with the 8th Avenue line underground, and it goes, which is the current A, B, C, D, E line that we can see in Manhattan today. This is the underground, and it's supposed to be the replacement for the 9th Avenue line. 1933, they add the Concourse line, part of BND today. And Concourse, IND crosses path with both IRT and BMT at this point, because they're the city, they have a lot of control over these things, and they create the dual contract with other two so that they could cross path with them. 1936, they add the 6th Avenue line underground. So we have the 6th Avenue above line and a 6th Avenue underground line now. 1937, we have the Crosstown line, which is part of the G line, which goes through Queens to Brooklyn. So at 1939, after the last 7 years of IND, the city-owned company, kind of abusing the system a little bit, they have most of the market share. The other two companies are losing money left and right, and the city-owned company can lose money because they have the government funding. And the other two competition at this point almost near bankruptcy. So in 1939, IND built out up to this point. They built these new lines. But in 1940, after years of being kind of bleeding money, BMT and IRT basically sells all of their lines to IND and becomes a single company. So you have the unification. BMT and IRT are now all owned by IND, the city. So it's a single company from this point onwards. At this point, 1940s, we realized that Manhattan as a city has grown way too much, and having the above ground lines are no longer profitable, super noisy for people, super risky. So we start shutting down some of those lines, and if you now go to Manhattan downtown, you'll actually see no presence of above ground lines within Manhattan anymore. They're all taken down. So this is when it starts in 1940. So 1941, IRT is now as a single company owned by IND, but still now building new lines, because IND at this point still hasn't merged everything. So they're still running both BMT and IRT as individual companies underneath. 1942, 2nd Avenue line gets shut down. 1953, again, now we're going to see one thing here, that the growth kind of slows down. We're not building new lines, like 10 new lines every year. 1940 to 1953, smaller adjustments happen, but we basically slow down our growth quite a lot. So in 1953, we create the New York City Transit Authority. That is the authority that owns all of New York City lines, which eventually gets owned by the state and funded by the state, but runs by the city. 1956, we have the IND Rockaway line. That is the A train going down all the way to the bottom. If you look at the bottom right, the A train, that's what we have today. 1967, is the major upgrade there is color scheme. We finally said, you know what, we're going to change the colors of these tracks. We can't build new tracks, but we can give them new colors. This is what happens when a startup becomes a mid-sized company and they create new divisions in the company. 1973, at this point in time, all the elevated lines that existed in Manhattan are gone. There is none left. All of them got taken down. 1979 is when we finally introduced the color that we have in the subway map today. Again, the work being done now are just changing colors, changing font in your main website. From then, we jump straight to 2015. After about 40 years, this is finally we're adding some new things in our train system, which is one stop from 34th Street to Hudson Avenue for 7 train. So if you look at from 1900 to 1930, we're adding like 10 miles of line every day. And now we're doing like one stop in 40 years. And in 2017, we added few more stops in the Q line. And this is an expansion that has been planned since 1919. We planned this, and because of trouble, we couldn't do this. And eventually, we did it in 2017. And the blue one that you see on the right, that is supposed to be the T line, is still planned. Hopefully, it will happen by the time I'm dead. So 2022, where we are today. This is what the subway looks like now. So you can see the colors that we chose in 1978 are the colors we use today. And the tracks exist just like this. If you go to any subway station, this is a map you can actually see somewhere within the station so that you can find your stops. But just looking at it, if I told you you have to go from, I don't know, somewhere on the right side, somewhere to the left, can you tell what trains you need to take?
No, for Google Maps.
So we can help you with that. But as a system grows, understanding of how the system works kind of goes down. So this is going to be a quick 2-minute video of how the train grew from what I said in voice. You're going to see a quick video. It's going to go super quick, so I'm going to try to point out some things as it happens. So let's see if it actually loads. All right, 1968, 72. So the same elevated line is growing. That's the only track that exists. Now the 6th Avenue shows up. And the 2nd and 3rd Avenue also quickly props up very quickly. Now the first Brooklyn line shows up there, and we're doing expansions every year at this point. Brooklyn is growing pretty rapidly, and we're adding lines, we're connecting things. There is no proper plan. We're just adding things wherever we can find space to. So Brooklyn is doing their own thing. Manhattan is doing their own thing. Still 1800s, the end of it, 1904, when we're going to see a new player show up in the mix. So we're seeing some expansions that are happening all over the place, but also some reductions, because as you're building things, you figure out this was wrong, we have to kind of deprecate. This is still the time when you can deprecate because you're still a startup. So in about 10 more years, you're going to see one of the numbers name changing from BRT to become BMT, because again, all these acquisitions are happening as you're building and removing things. So this is all 1917. We built a ton of tracks in 1917. But again, all these companies are new. They're trying to acquire as much market space as they can. So we're building random things. We're connecting random connections. But all of this doesn't have a proper plan because there is no authority to control where it should go where. This is the first time where we see that tracks crossing path with each other, because the Brooklyn and the Manhattan line finally have some dual contracts to build track in each other's path. So BMT now finally showed up in 1924. This is the first track, the blue-green, that they built together. They figured out fighting in the same space only brings the value down, so we should build things together. And now 1932, the red line, IND, shows up. With all the government money, they're building lines like crazy. And they start to take over the other two companies. And in this time, you'll see that the blue and green doesn't build anything new because they don't have any more money. And they're losing money like crazy. 1940, eventually, they buy both the other company, but they still keep them separate. But at the same time, they're removing all the elevated lines because they figured out that is not profitable anymore. 1950, at this point, we're only just removing things. We're not adding more things, we're just removing things. 1953, after NYCTA gets built, we have some state funding, so we're building some new tracks. But now we're just adding small additions, changing the color to something. 1973, we're just removing some things here and there. But the time is passing so much quicker now because adding anything new is more expensive, and we cannot build new things easily. So as you can see, from 1950 to 2020, it took like 10 seconds because at that time, we're just removing one thing here, changing color there, and adding one or two things here and there. Not as useful. OK, we did this one. At this point, you must be thinking, wow, this is boring. I came here for a tech talk, and I get like a lecture on trains. I don't care about this. So what has this got to do with scale? I mean, if you're not asking this, I appreciate you. But if you're asking this, I have answers. So NYC subway is one of the oldest subway system in the world. Not the oldest, but one of the oldest. It is one of the largest as well. It is by size, I think, 7th, only behind some of Shanghai and London Metro. And it also supports a lot of people. Like in New York, there is about 17 million people, and we did do about 1.5 billion rides a year. So it is a big system. It has survived in one shape or another for 150 years. Imagine working for a company, and I did work for a company called IBM that survived 150 years. But imagine working for another company that has survived over 150 years. It's a big accomplishment to be able to do that. And again, it serves over 5 million rides a day. If you worked for an application that had 5 million active users daily, like it would be pretty amazing, wouldn't it? So what's the cost of NYC subway scale? For the growth they have, what is the cost they have to pay to be there? Well, the easy one to understand is probably this: money. It costs money. So more scale, more expensive. Each expansion costs significantly more money because, again, you have to deal with, okay, I'm building an expansion here, but I already have something close by. Should I just connect to this? But land acquisition becomes more expensive because as the city grows, land becomes more and more expensive. And subway partially is responsible for the city's expense growth of the land, because wherever the subway track went, land around got super expensive. So for the subway to grow more, it became even more expensive. Also another thing, as the company size grows, like once MTA hit 70,000 people, about 20 to 30% of the people are there just to manage the other 70% people, right? When you have a startup for 10 people, everybody knows what everybody's doing. But when you reach like 10,000 people, then you need about 100 to 500 managers to be able to give you vacation approval, right? So that just like as it grows, it becomes more and more worse. You need manager for managers for managers. In IBM, between me and the CEO, there was like 8 people, and I knew 3 of them. So other 5, I didn't know what they did for their job, but they did something. Same with Google. Like at Google, between me and Sundar, there's like 7 people, and I know 3 of them again. So it's probably me that's the problem. Time, right? So as you can see, early days of MTA or subway, we could build new tracks like crazy because each of those small companies decided, you know what? That place looks like it needs a train. I'm going to build a train there. But now MTA has to have plans. It has to have plans for plans. It has to have meetings for those plans. It has to have meetings with the community where they're trying to build these things. So you have to basically herd this cattle of hundreds of millions of people to come to an agreement about, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to change the font on this one leaflet. Let's have 5 meetings about it. So again, the more people you have, more time it takes to do anything. And the last one is people. MTA, to manage all its systems, they need to hire a lot of people. And to manage all those people, you need even more people. It's like a never-ending loop of people. So these are the easy ones to understand, right? Like we all get that these 3 things are going to happen no matter where we go and how. The moment you start growing, these are going to happen. Let's talk about some of the other ones that are a little bit harder to grasp. So the thing I said, like just by looking at the picture without Google Maps, you would have a hard time understanding how do you use this system, right? It's a big map of things connected to something. You need like good documentation for MTS side for you to be able to use this system. And it's not just for the user that is trying to take the trains. It's also for employees that are trying to understand how to fix things, how to improve things, how to connect this thing to that thing. So as the company size grows, no one has any idea how the whole system works. People just know their own siloed information. And as it grows, those silos become more and more tighter. And at some point, you reach a point where unless you are in the immediate team, you have no other information about the rest of the world. So that's the cost you have to pay when you try to scale, because no one person can keep the entire thing in their head. The next one is innovation versus preservation. In 1903, when we were just building new tracks, we realized, steam-powered trains are no longer useful. Let's electrify the entire system. At that time, the train system was fairly small, so when we started innovating, we could just swap every system out with electricity. But if Subway wants today to change their train track to something, we have 600 miles of tracks that all has to change. So we can't really innovate as quickly as we could when we were smaller in the train system. But at the same time, the system you already have, we have some ways to make sure that those things are continue to run, continue to support the people. So all of us have probably been in teams where we're in charge of maintaining something, where we want to be building new cool things. So this is the struggle. The bigger you get, the more things you already have, and someone has to be paid to continue running those things. So yeah, to make things, new things, or make the old thing work. So oftentimes, this is the challenge you're dealing with all the time. And for MTA, because it's a public-facing thing that people use all the time, there is a lot of external forces that you have to deal with. Outside things affects MTA way more. Again, when I say MTA, MTA stands for something Transit Authority, Metropolitan. So that's the short name for train. So the New York subway gets affected by outside things like politics, people's perception of it. It's a city-owned thing, so people vote actually to say this should be happening, this shouldn't be happening. For example, in 2018, the L train wanted to do some changes to fix the tracks. But people around the L train area said, you know what, if you shut down the train, I cannot go to work. So people voted to stop the improvement from happening. So now L train cannot shut down, cannot fix the problem. So L train is going to continue to stay the often breaking every other day train for the rest of its life, probably. And when you are MTA, you find actually competition from unlikely places. Like companies like Uber and taxi became more popular in New York because they were pointing to how trains were slow and late, and people should be taking taxis over public transport. So you get competition from places that you don't really, it's not a train system, it's a car system. And the other thing is diminishing returns. Like each new thing you do actually adds less value every time you do it. Like the tracks we were adding early days, each track just opened up a new part of the city for the train system. Now, when you are updating something, we're updating what? We're updating the color scheme, or we're trying to add new track. It costs like significantly more, but adds like 1 or 2 extra stops. Like for the 7th train line, it took like some $20 billion to add 1 stop worth of tracks because we're trying to do it underground. We're trying to do it under like Midtown Manhattan, which is extremely expensive these days. And finally, scaling costs you scale. So the more you grow, the growing bigger becomes more and more difficult. Right? So growing pains. Because MTA is so big, for MTA to grow bigger, it is just more painful in all the other things we talked about. So these are the other costs of scale. These are not associated with MTA itself. This is just generally problems people face when they're trying to scale. Number 1 is slow to change. Right? Company like MTA, company like Google, IBM, Amazon, they're so big, if they have to just drastically change one part of their business to something else, it's going to be super expensive for them to do so because 100,000 people changing their mind or changing their workload to something completely different overnight is not possible. Next one is first-to-market challenges. So in recent years, you have seen some of the challenges Netflix has been facing in the streaming business. So they were first to market in the streaming world for the most part. They had huge growth, huge scale. But now, because they're first to market, they made all the mistakes they were going to make as a streaming company. Now companies like Disney, HBO are coming in, following their footsteps, not making the same mistakes. And Netflix is struggling to keep up and keep growing at the scale they were growing. Their stock shows that people are kind of losing trust in them. I hope they pull through because they're a great company. But at the same time, being first to market makes it difficult for you to be able to see what's in the future because you are the person who has to see the future yourself. This one is something a lot of the companies are facing these days. All scale has an upper limit, right? If you're Facebook and you're trying to scale, Facebook is running out of people to sign up to their services, right? Like they have over 2 billion users in multiple of their services. Like they literally don't have enough people in the world to continue their growth in the same trajectory they had between 2008 to 2018-19, right? It's not physically possible anymore. And this one is fairly easy to understand. Uber, when they first started, they were pretty much the only company in that space. But as they grow, as their growth trajectory was super high, it actually attracted a lot more competition. We had companies like Lyft, Get, all of them coming into the same space. Uber's best way to profitability was supposed to be they're going to be the only player left in the taxi business, and they're going to make all the money there was to be made. But when they have competition, it doesn't work the same way. So Uber is right now trying to figure out how they do they stay the top dominant player in the taxi business. So at this point in the talk where I am supposed to give you some actionable items so that you can go home and scale to the moon, so you might be wondering, what can I do? Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, nothing, right? A lot of these things about scale are inherent to what the scaling is. Your scaling means your surface area is getting bigger, you're bringing more revenue. That means you have to spend more money to continue to bring that revenue for the rest of the company's life. But because some of these challenges are fundamental to how scale actually works. The more you grow, the more you need to support that growth. Some of these things might actually help. So I'm going to try to give you some advices so that you don't go empty-handed from this talk. So number 1, document like you are guiding someone to disarm a nuke. Extreme, I know. The idea is, like when you are small, as I said, it's easy to keep the entire company's idea in your head, and every single person just knows every single person, and they can talk to each other. You know Jeff in the corner who knows how to solve this problem. But as you grow bigger, and when you reach the size of 5 to 10,000 people, that no longer works. If all 5,000 people are talking to all 5,000 people, all day you're just going to talk. You're not going to get any work done. So this is where documenting information and codifying all the processes in your company actually helps you to continue to scale the way you were. The next one is oftentimes companies will go, you know what, we're going to spend a lot of time doing this improvement. Should we spend the time? Whether or not you do the work, your time is going to go away anyway. So might as well do something meaningful, right? And this is not to say, oh, you should always jump on the first idea that comes to your head. But if you can do the pros and cons analysis and figure out this is going to actually improve the processes we have, this is something worth spending time on. So spend time on that is meaningful. This one, again, if you have a manager in the room here, please hire good people and let them grow. Because if you want to grow your company and your business, the best way to do it is get good people and let them do their thing they do best. Micromanaging and trying to kind of get everybody to do the thing you want to do is probably not going to work too good. How many of you are managers here? So to the managers and to the person that are getting managed, both have learnings to do. If you're someone who's getting managed, make sure that you communicate what your goal from this particular job is and what you want to get out of it. And if you're a manager, you also want to be able to find the people. And not everybody is going to be good at everything, but find the people and try to match them to the best of their abilities. And I think that's the way both can get out something from it. Again, this one is kind of counterintuitive. I just said people should know everything about everything. At the same time, I'm saying create isolation. If in a company at the size of Google, if I want to know everything that is happening, I don't know, in the Nest ecosystem, I'm going to spend a lot of time doing something that doesn't push my business team's goal, right? So there's some isolations that are necessary at certain scale. So not everybody needs to know everything. But the idea is documentation should be there so that when someone wants to know something, they doesn't have to go ask Jeff. They should be able to just look it up internal systems so that they can know things without having to go through a lot of hoops. So make it reachable, but also create the isolation so that for day-to-day job, not everybody has to know everything. And this one, again, be future-looking. Whether or not you're first in the market or you're just getting in there, look into the system you're in and see what the future of the system looks like and what can you do to prepare yourself for the next 6 months, 1 year, 5 year, 10 year. And some of the things that Facebook is probably going to try to do now is look to grow vertically. You can't grow horizontally with more and more users. How do you make more money with the people that you already have? Like grow your business vertically in the systems you're already in. This one is tough, but keep yourself nimble. If you're especially a startup, if something is supposed to fail, it's probably going to fail. Make sure you can pivot. This is the word I learned from Phil's talk yesterday. So if you haven't done it, go back in time and watch that talk. Take reasonable risks, right? Like all the growth that happens in our world happens because someone somewhere decided to take some risk that paid off. So if you are small to mid-sized companies, you need to take reasonable risk that you think is going to pay off. Because if you're just playing it safe, growth is not going to happen. And this is the most important one out of all of this. Be open to failure. Things are going to go bad, things are going to fail, but learn from it, move on, and do the next thing. Let's do a quick time check. We're doing great. OK. So you thought the train parts were done? It's not. We have more trains. So a few months ago, my wife and I visited Prague for a conference. And this is the subway system in Prague. OK? This is a fairly new subway system, started in 1970-ish. And their numbers are, they have about 61 stations, 3 lines. Their route length is about 40 miles. But they support 600 million rides a year, only 1/3 of New York's ridership with 1/10 of the infrastructure, right? So how does that work? So let's take a look at how the subway in Prague grew over time. We started with 1 line, C. Then we added some tracks in A. In '84, we added some more tracks in lines in C. We're adding some lines now in B. We're continuing to add more stuff in B. And we're just growing. But the thing is, the city came with a plan that's saying, OK, this is where my people are in the middle. As I build the track, I might have some more need on the edges. It had zero deprecation in the last 50 years. It just started from the middle and slowly grew out to the edges. And 2006 was the last, 8 was the last time they added anything. And this is what the subway system looks like now. So I feel like, again, they had a lot of second-to-market advantages where New York didn't, where New York was building the city, building the subway parallel to each other. Whereas for Prague, they knew they needed a subway. They already had the city, and they just built it out from the center outwards wherever the need happened, right? So this is kind of the contrast between how New York struggled with our sizes, where Prague seemed to be doing pretty well so far. So with that, I will say, be like Prague, grow where you need to, and thank you for joining my talk.